All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. This is Churn Zero's latest edition of our Impact webinar series, Managing Onboarding for Low-Touch Customers. So we are expecting a pretty good group here today. I can see that we already have folks trickling in. I'm going to wait another 30, 45 seconds or so just to let other people join into the webinar here. So it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon for me here in Washington, DC. Wherever you're calling in from, whatever time it is, want to thank you for carving out a portion of your day to spend with us here at Churn Zero. So just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. Please feel free to leave questions in the Q&A in the Zoom meeting. Time permitting, I'll try to answer a couple at the end of the call. If I don't get to your question, I'll make sure that you know how to contact us for any follow-up questions that you may have, right? We'll also be sending out a recording of this webinar shortly after the end here. So you will be able to go back and review it or share this with other members of your team that might be interested. So let me formally introduce myself and we're going to get started here, folks. My name is Chris Nemeh. I'm an account executive here at Churn Zero. Like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about managing onboarding for low-touch customers. So just a quick walkthrough of the agenda here. We're going to start off by talking about how important it is for you to leverage data to empower your customers to be self-sufficient during the onboarding process. We'll then move on to differentiating between your customers simply activating your product versus them achieving the aha moment where they're starting to get value out of your solution. Then we'll finish off with how you can keep the excitement high for low-touch customers throughout the onboarding process to encourage them to reach those positive outcomes. So what we're going to start off with is just a definition here. Let's talk about what it means when we say low-touch segment. So what you're seeing is a helpful chart of the different account coverage models. For comparison's sake, at the top of the chart is the high-touch segment, which is one CSM, one account manager being responsible for a small handful of accounts. At the bottom of the chart is the low touch segment, which is where we'll be focused on today. So regardless of what you call it, whether it's low touch, tech touch, digital touch, growth segment, the definition's always going to be the same. It's when one person is managing many customers. So again, we're going to be focused on this segment today, how we can help that one person manage all of those accounts specifically during the onboarding process. When this is done right, it's a very powerful and proactive way to manage your customers. When it's done poorly, it turns into reactive customer support where you're just responding to an influx of tickets coming in, right? Bad experience for your customer, bad experience for your customer success managers or account managers as well. So now that we have a definition of what we mean by low touch, I want to engage with the audience here with a quick poll. Would love to know for everyone in the webinar, what percentage of your customers fall into that low touch segment today? Again, what percentage of the accounts that you're managing would you deem as low touch? We have 0 to 25%, 26 to 50%, 51 to 75%, and 76% or more. So hopefully we have some results coming in here. And I'm having trouble viewing those results, but presumably we've got some of these answers. And my guess is that it's going to be a good mixture, right? It kind of developed. Here we go. We've got our results. So it looks like most of the folks on the webinar, 40%, somewhere between 0 and 25%, but there is a pretty good mix, 20% at 26 to 50, 24% at 51 to 75, and 16% at 76% or more. So that's great to see. We've got a good mixture of how many customers are being managed as low touch. And one thing to point out here is it kind of is going to depend on a few different factors for how many of your customers are low touch, right? It could be the amount the customer's spending with you. You may have a high volume of low value customers. It could be the complexity of your product. If your product is intuitive to use and more hands-off from your perspective, it could also be the resources that you have available to spend with your customers. So the first two we can't really help you with, but the last one, the resources that you can provide to your customers, is where we can definitely help. So let's just move on to adding some context as to why onboarding is such a critical stage of the customer lifecycle. Probably all seen a graph like this before. It's the retention curve over time. Especially with low touch onboarding, retention can be drastically impacted in those first few months from that onboarding experience. So the unfortunate reality is when it comes to engaging with your customers during low touch onboarding, it's often being driven by marketing style emails that are not providing your customer with the personalized experience that they're expecting. Sure, we've all purchased software. We receive a welcome email. 3 days later, you receive another email telling you to do something that may or may not be relevant to you, right? To make matters worse, a few days after that, you're getting another email telling you to complete step 4 and 5 of the onboarding process when you haven't even completed step 2 yet. So the general issue with those types of email campaigns is that they're strictly time-based triggers. And when it comes to onboarding, we want to be more focused on outcomes and actions. So in big, bold letters here to hammer home the point, we want to make it abundantly clear that when it comes to low-touch onboarding strategies, it has to be data-driven. Right? You're going to be leveraging automation with this segment so that you can do more with less. And automation is going to be pretty useless unless there isn't data behind it and driving the automation so that your customers are receiving relevant messaging at the right time. So let's talk a little bit more about that data. Hypothetically, if I were a high touch CSM managing 2 customers, I would already know everything about them, right? But if I'm managing 100 or even 500 customers, I need to find a way to do this more efficiently. It's going to be impossible to stay on top of all of my accounts without having data readily available. So data is also going to solve one of the most common questions that we hear about low touch onboarding. And that is, how do I find the right balance between being too automated or spending too much time being too personalized? So the ideal state is going to be a harmonious blend of those two things. Your paying customer is going to demand an authentic and unique experience, but you have to be able to provide that in a repeatable and scalable way for your team and your business. So it can be a challenge to find that balance, but data is going to be the solution to automate with timely and effective messaging. So you can use customer data to create 2 things that are going to be extremely helpful. The first is the persona of your customer or user, right? You want to define who the user is. Are they an executive that you wouldn't reasonably expect to be using your solution on a daily basis? Maybe they're an admin that you would reasonably expect to be using your product day to day. You'd also like to know the size of the company and their desired outcomes or goals, which you hopefully capture during the sales process. The next thing is supplementing that with usage data, right? It could be like the way that your customer is engaging with your product, the frequency that they're logging in, their license utilization across their business. Are they using all of the sticky features that you would expect them to? So if you put those 2 things together, not only do we know who your user is, we can understand what they're doing in your solution and help drive them towards their overall goal. That's what's going to allow the automation to feel much more targeted and relevant to those different personas. So think of an example here. Let's say you're selling CRM software. Everyone's probably familiar with Salesforce or HubSpot. If Salesforce recognizes that an admin user hasn't created a report 14 days into the onboarding process, they should probably be receiving an email with messaging driving them to use that feature because that's pretty relevant when it comes to using a CRM. Totally hands off from a CSM's perspective, but it's helping the customer move through the process. So let's talk specifically about email messaging and what they should look like. And we'll start with the concept of the welcome email. I'm sure if I took another poll on who uses welcome emails, I would guess to close, 100% of you would be using some form of a welcome email. And they are very, very useful tools, but you don't want these to be super generic with everyone receiving the same email. Rather, we want to use that persona data that we talked about to provide a more useful email to specific types of customers. Sure, we've all bought or downloaded software where the welcome email is generic. It ends up being the only touch point you'll get, which is a real missed opportunity from your vendor. So these welcome emails can be valuable for your customer when it's empowering them to be self-sufficient. So once you've identified your user personas, make those welcome emails include impactful resources based on that type of user or persona. Links to videos, webinars, LMS training courses, customer communities, and even success plans. Let's talk a little bit about how success plans can help your customers to be more self-sufficient. I think success plans are often thought of, maybe specifically for high touch models, but the reality is they do work great for low touch customers as well. They don't necessarily have to be super detailed, but you do want to show your customer a clear path to success as they onboard. We want to empower your customers to be self-sufficient, provide them with guidance on how they're going to reach their goals. And it's really okay for your customers to have some element of DIY in their experience. That's a pretty common expectation for most software consumers, at least today, right? So you've already sent that great welcome email. What should the next step be for your customer? And what should the next step be for you as you engage with your customer? So if you can see based on the data that you're getting back into churn zero, that your new customer is accelerating through the process and they've already completed steps 4 and 5, they should not be receiving a time-based email about how to do step 2, right? It should be based on the data, based on how you're seeing them progress through their success plan. So I'll give you a real world example of one of churn zero's customers. It's a company called Untapped. They sell to restaurants and breweries, and Untapped software allows those restaurants and breweries to advertise their beer menus, right? It does a lot more than that, but let's think of that as a simple example for now. So Untapped have a low touch and a high touch segment. Prior to joining churn zero, Untapped would have all of their customers go through a hands-on onboarding, which included a dedicated CSM welcome call. So one of the first things that a customer should do in their success plan when onboarding with Untapped is create their first beer menu in the Untapped platform. By using churn zero for that low touch segment of accounts, Untapped sent a great welcome email. It provided links and in-app tutorials that walk the customer through the steps required to create that first menu, totally hands-off for the CSM. And then within 24 hours, if that user still hadn't created the menu, it would prompt another email with more reinforcement driving the customer to create the menu. If another 24 hours passed, we still haven't seen that menu created, another email would go out, including a link to the CSM's calendar, allowing the customer to schedule a welcome call. But just from the initial email with those in-app tutorials, Untapped saw an 80% completion rate in terms of new users creating their first menu within that 24-hour period. That means 80% less customers needing to schedule welcome calls since they're empowered to do these things on their own. So in the Untapped example, creating that first menu was the aha moment for Untapped's customers. And that brings us to our next point here. There should be a difference, and you should really take pains to differentiate between your customers simply activating and getting their instance of your product up and running versus the aha moment when they're seeing the value and doing the things in your platform that show you that the customer is achieving the goals, right? They're doing the things that they wanted to do when they purchased from you. So here's a few other tech companies and some examples of their aha moments. Let's use Slack as an example. When Slack sells into a business, they're not necessarily just trying to get companies to enroll their employees into Slack, right? Just because you create a Slack account, it doesn't mean you're necessarily finding value using Slack. Rather, the aha moment for Slack is once that company has sent 2,000 messages across their user base, right? That's the point that they're trying to drive their customers to. They want to keep encouraging their customers to send messages until they hit the threshold. That's the aha moment. That's the moment of value when a business is using and utilizing Slack properly. So just like in the earlier slides, we're talking about data. Slack wouldn't know that a customer had hit that moment unless they had the data to show it. So data is going to be really important for defining and tracking how quickly your customers are reaching their aha moments. Conversely, when we're talking about onboarding, let's identify the oh no moments, right? These are common pitfalls that your new customers are falling into when they're getting started in your product. So where do you see customers typically getting caught up in the process, right? What are the common support tickets you can look at that are coming from your new customers within their first 7, within the first 30 days of using your solution, right? Identify what those moments are so you can have a workflow in place to immediately remedy these issues. If we see a ticket coming in from an onboarding customer, let's make sure that we can automate the response that tries to correct that behavior or tries to guide the customer through figuring out what feature is giving them problems. Again, it's automated and it's timely messaging based on data. So let's use churn zero as an example, our own solution. We have a lot of great reporting built into churn zero, and we used to get a lot of support tickets asking us to change or asking how our users can change one of the columns in our reports. Now, the reality is there's a button in Churn Zero to do just that. But since we saw those support tickets coming in, we would send an in-app message to all of our new customers that hadn't clicked on that button within their first 14 days of being with us. Now we're seeing that ticket maybe once a month, right? So it's really important to identify your oh no moments in addition to the aha moments. All right, so let's talk about how we can keep the excitement high during the onboarding process. Your customers invested the time and resources in evaluating your solution. They've built a case internally to justify purchasing your product. Now they're going through the onboarding process. We want to keep that momentum high. It's a first impression. It's really, really important. So we talked about the importance of the welcome email, how it can be a powerful tool for your customers. Another great idea is a shareable success plan, where your customer can see clear expectations about what needs to happen and when, so that they can move at their own comfortable pace. This is also a great way to keep the excitement high. People love to see the progress that they've made, take a look back and feel a sense of accomplishment, right? And if you really wanted to take it a step further, sharing this type of checklist in your application itself, when your customers are logged in, is a great way to gamify the experience for your customers, keep that excitement high, allow them to check certain things off the box as they're using your product and getting themselves onboarded. We also want to celebrate and encourage your customers as they're getting those quick wins. So use positive reinforcement to keep the excitement high. We're looking at data again. So when Untappd sees that first beer menu is created, they're pushing an in-app message to their customers, congratulating on that. Hey, you're doing a great job. You're making great progress. When Slack sees 100 messages sent, they're encouraging their customer to keep going, keep sending messages. Let's get you to that 2,000 message threshold. So whatever it is, let your customer know that they're off to a great start. Additionally, there's some good opportunity for additional opportunity here beyond just congratulating the user. You may also want to share the success of your users with the executive sponsor at your customer who may not be a daily user. So maybe if we see that your customer is progressing through onboarding, you can have an automated email go out to the executive sponsor, letting them know that their team is already adopting your solution. They're accelerating through the onboarding process. They're getting value out of the product that the executive sponsor agreed to purchase, right? Could also be a great opportunity to ask for an upsell maybe. With Slack, going back to them as an example, once a team hits 2,000 messages, maybe there's some automated trigger asking if they'd be willing to refer you to within a different department within that company. But that goes back to those user personas we were talking about. If you're selling into a small company and you already have 100% penetration, wouldn't make sense to send that email. But if we're at a big organization with 10% penetration, that's a great step to automate in there, to go for the ask, see who else we could potentially get to use our solution since onboarding is going so well. So here's 3 of the main takeaways from today, and I'm hoping you walked away from this conversation with a better understanding of how using data to make your customers more self-sufficient, get to that aha moment, and keep the excitement high through the process can be achievable, right? The pro tip here is for everyone who already has onboarding processes in place, try to start small. Don't completely redo the onboarding process from day one. Work on that welcome email first, having a few different templates built out depending on personas. And then from there, start to look at what you want your customers to do 3, 5, 7, 30 days into the onboarding process, and then build triggers around to drive them through that. So that's the idea here, and want to go ahead and move to any questions that I might see in the chat here. So let's take a look. So somebody mentioned here, you were talking about data. What happens if I don't have product usage data readily available? Okay, so that's a really good question. Obviously, we're talking about software in this case. So typically, product usage data does reside somewhere. You may not have access to it or have to be readily available at your fingertips, but as long as it's somewhere, in a database, in your platform, we could pipe that into Churn Zero. If there's a complete absence of usage data, think about other metrics you could potentially use. Maybe it's support tickets. Maybe you can create your own data by leveraging surveys. So sending out an NPS, CSAT, effort score at different stages of the onboarding process, and then automating based on the responses that you get by. Okay, another question here. I showed a slide and there was a success plan. How do we determine what to show the customer? So good question there. Within Churn Zero, if you're using Churn Zero to build out the onboarding process for your customers, you're going to want to track both the internal steps that you need to take as a business to onboard a customer and the external achievements, like those aha moments that you want your customers to do when they're onboarding. So when you send a success plan to your customers, you have full control over what steps you're actually exposing. So just show the customer those achievements that they should be doing in your platform to onboard themselves. You don't necessarily have to show them all of the internal steps that it takes for you to onboard a customer. All right, as far as questions go, that's all the time that I have today to answer, but you have my email address here. Please feel free to get in touch with me. I can help answer your question. If I have to, I'll point you in the right direction here at Churn Zero. Would also encourage all of you to follow us on social media. You can see Twitter, LinkedIn, go to our website. Please feel free to reach out to me as well. And like I mentioned, we will be sending a recording of this webinar after this, but want to thank you all so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and we hope to hear from you soon.